Welcome to Psychic Star Studios!
Ah, yes. Poptropica. Poptropica was one of the greatest online games to ever come out of the late 2000s Adobe Flash era. The site first launched in September of 2007 by Diary of a Wimpy Kid author Jeff Kinney. But today, we're not just looking at any old Poptropica, we're going to look at early Poptropica. Well, kind of. Sure, this video will touch on the early Poptropica island itself, but also Poptropica's earliest developmental stages, and what the game was like when early Poptropica was still the only playable island. And as a primary source, I'm using the PoptropicaHelp blog. So without further ado, let's get started! In the very beginning, Poptropica primarily took inspiration from the Nickelodeon website Nicktropolis. In fact, Poptropica's original name was even Poptropolis. However, the Poptropolis name would eventually be used for the island Poptropolis games. Poptropica's early character creator even more closely resembled the traditional ones you'd see in the Funbrain arcade games. In fact, Poptropica's signature platforming even had some Funbrain inspiration as well. The platforming primarily came from Funbrain's game Mighty Guy. Eventually though, Poptropica did get released, except it had a much nicer blue color scheme compared to the old yellow one, and it looks significantly less like Funbrain's arcade games. Now, let's take a look at all the differences that there were when early Poptropica was the only Poptropica. In fact, we're going so far back, Poptropica's second island, Sharktooth Island, hadn't even come out yet. And since Poptropica only had one island at the time, there was no blimp. Instead, new players would jump into the game through a hole on the right side of the screen. In a nutshell, the player would decorate their avatar, jump into the hole, and then land on early Poptropica right between the Pop Art Museum and the Soda Pop Shop. Now, between you and me, I think it's very strange seeing nothing where the blimp should be. This is probably what most people know when they look at Poptropica's map. Well, in this very early build of Poptropica, the map instead looked like this. Now, this may not look too interesting, but the map itself looks more realistic, I guess. However, one interesting thing to note is that on the left side of the map, there was a percentage number that shows how much the player explored Poptropica, which is something that is nowhere to be found in the later version of the map. As for mini arcade games, there was only 4. Now, one more difference I want to point out is the amount of space between the arcade and the early Poptropica sign. You see, the arcade only appears on Main Street when there aren't any advertisement buildings. However, since there were no ad buildings yet, the early Poptropica sign was right up close next to the arcade building. Ad buildings are essentially how Poptropica is sponsored, since a building based on their sponsor will appear on Main Street for a limited time. Most other Poptropica islands typically leave an empty space on Main Street for their ad buildings to sit. But in early Poptropica's case, the ad building would just replace the arcade. And of course, some ad buildings were pretty big, so there needed to be extra space between the arcade and the sign. And back then, nobody wanted to sponsor Poptropica, so what do you need all that extra space for? Unfortunately, the video I've been using as a source doesn't show very much. But on the bright side, I found another YouTube channel that shows the same early version of Poptropica. In fact, upon further investigation, I think this might be an even older version of the build we looked at earlier. This may actually be even the oldest version, since in this video, the word beta is shown next to the Poptropica logo. Also, instead of being pictures of a backpack and a map respectively, the items and map icons are instead just simple circles with words in them, making them more closely resemble the save button at the bottom corner. And as for arcade games, the hoops and skydive games were missing. We also know this is a very, very early build, because just like the other one we looked at, there is no blimp. Although I will say thanks to PoptropicaHelp for showing us more of the very early version of the game, there is actually one thing I've been quite curious about. Everybody knows that once you complete an island's quest in Poptropica, you're rewarded with an island medallion. But this is what I've been wondering since I've discovered the early build. In this primitive build of Poptropica, what exactly did getting the medallion look like? My wonder primarily comes from the congratulatorial screen when you earn the medallion, because it says, head back to the blimp to visit other islands. But, as we've already established, back then there was no blimp, nor were there any other islands. But, more importantly, did the medallion itself even look like this? Or was it just a generic looking medal? None of the videos that I've seen showing this primitive version of Poptropica show any of them completing the island. So this is all kind of a mystery. If anybody who's worked on Poptropica or at least played this primitive build could answer my question, that would be great. Looks like we've reached the end of the video. So, let me know in the comments. Were you a Poptropica kid like me? I'd love to hear. Anyways, I'll see you in the next episode of Psychic Star Studios. Bye.